Russia announces a ceasefire to allow civilians to safely evacuate the towns of Mariupol and Volnovka in the Donbass region. A report by the European Parliament says that 77% of women in the bloc believe that during the coronavirus pandemic, physical and emotional violence against women have increased. The fifth session of the 13th National People's Congress opened at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing and is scheduled to conclude on March 11th. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Stay with us. Russia announced a ceasefire to allow civilians to safely evacuate the towns of Mariupol and Volnovka in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense announced that as of 10 a.m. Moscow time, the Russian side declared ceasefire and opens humanitarian corridors for civilians to leave these two cities. The official military part details that the humanitarian corridors and routes were agreed with Ukraine. According to the Russian ministry, about 200,000 people intend to leave the city of Mariupol, and another 20,000 want to leave Volnovka. Some Ukrainian media have reported that Kiev will start the ceasefire at 11 a.m. local time. On Friday, the Russian parliament passed a bill introducing punishment for international spreading fake information about military actions and was signed by the President Vladimir Putin. The development came amid a crackdown by Russian authorities on independent media and criticism of last week's special military operation in Ukraine. Spreading what Russian authorities deemed to be false information is punishable by fines of between 700,000 rubles for civilians, while for people in public office, the penalties provide for fines from more than 3 million rubles. The legislation also establishes punishments for calls for coercive measures against the country, incitement to hatred, and fabrication of evidence. Also on Friday, the Russian Federal Service for Supervision of the Telecommunications, Information Technology and Mass Media, Roskomnadzor, decided to block access to Facebook and Twitter on the national territory in response to the platform's measures against Russian media. The Prosecutor General's office, in agreement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, considered Facebook to be involved in the violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms of Russian citizens. Previously, it was reported that Facebook imposed restrictions on official accounts of 4 Russian media outlets: television channel Zvezda, RIA Novosti news agency, and online platforms Lenta.ru and Gazeta.ru. Roskomnadzor demanded the administration of Meta Platforms, which owns the social network, to remove the restrictions imposed by Facebook and explains the reasons for their implementations, but the owners ignored its demands. According to Roskomnadzor, the social network Twitter has also been blocked on the territory of Russia. Different services have stopped working on the territory of Russia. At the moment, the online hotel booking service Booking.com does not allow to find a book a hotel in this country. The official website of the service on Friday even stopped handling requests to search for accommodations in Russia. At the same time, it is still possible to search for hotels for booking in other countries. There is no official announcement from the company yet. Earlier, the U.S. accommodation booking service Airbnb announced that it was temporarily ceasing operations in Russia and Belarus. From that country, it also reported that since Thursday, Medusa, BBC, Radio Liberty, Deutsche Welle, Google Play Store, and Apple Store have also stopped working. In the United States, gasoline prices spiked, especially in California. Crude oil prices, the raw material for gasoline, have been hit hard and have risen well above $110 per barrel, with experts concerned about the impact of sanctions on Russian supplies pushing Moscow out of the world economy. Californians filling up their cars on Friday winced at the spiraling cost of gasoline because they are the residents of the state that has long had the highest gas prices in the U.S. California drivers are paying an average of more than $5 per gallon for the first time. There are 9 states, California, Hawaii, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Illinois, New York, and Pennsylvania, where the average price is already covered $4 a gallon, according to the U.S. Automobile Association. On Friday, the European Union increased the sanctions imposed on Russia by suspending any cooperation with Moscow regarding research and innovation. Thus, the European Union is voiding the agreements and contracts signed with Moscow within the Horizon Europe Framework Program, which is the EU's main funding program for research and innovation. Likewise, the European Union is holding cross-border cooperation programs with Russia and Belarus, which is part of the European Neighborhood Instrument and the Black Sea Region Program Interreg. In Serbia, citizens demonstrated in the capital Belgrade to show their support for Russia in the context of the Eurasian nation's military operation in Ukraine. Around 1,000 demonstrators carrying Russian and Serbian flags marched in Serbia, claiming the historical ties between the two nations and stating out loud that Crimea is part of Russia. In this regard, the people in the rally criticized the decision of the Serbian government to vote in favor of the UN resolution rejecting the Russian military operation in Ukraine. The demonstrators supported the decisions taken by the Russian government while stating that they will intensify mobilizations.
Ukraine is currently being liberated from neo-Nazis. There is nothing more to be said. Western system penetrate Ukraine. Russians, our brothers, are liberated. We hope it's liberating the whole world. I can't say I'm happy because of what is going on. We are in shock. Brothers killing each other. It's a tragedy. But this has to be done. Evil has reached Russian borders, and if it wasn't for this, we would have been a world war. So this is better than waiting for a bigger conflict.
On Friday, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky criticized the decision of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization not to introduce a no-fly zone in Ukraine. Zelensky criticized NATO's decision for ruling out a no-fly zone over his country, asserting that it was dealt with within the framework of a summit which he called weak and confused. Likewise, the Ukrainian president affirmed that in a sector of the organization there is an intention to position a narrative that would contrast Kiev's request in order not to provoke a direct conflict between the organization and Russia. The fact comes after NATO recently confirmed it will not send its forces to Ukraine. 8 days after Moscow began the special operation in Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin urged Russia's neighbors not to escalate tensions.
Advise them not to escalate the situation, not to introduce any restrictions. We fulfill all our obligations and will continue to fulfill them. We don't see any necessity to escalate the situation and worsen our relations. All our actions, if they're taken, are taken exclusively as a response to unfriendly actions towards the Russian Federation. I think everyone should consider normalizing relations.
On Friday, a representative from China to the United Nations, Sang Yun, called on Russia and Ukraine to remain committed to seeking a political settlement. Chinese government has offered to act as mediator and denounce trade and financial sanctions against Russia.
Encourage Russia and Ukraine to remain committed to seeking a political settlement and reach a negotiating solution that accommodates the legitimate concerns of the two parties and contributes to Europe's lasting peace and security. China welcomes all of diplomatic efforts conducive to political settlement and has played and will continue a constructive role to this end. The international community should stay cool-headed and rational as soon as responsible and impartial and objective approach to create a sound atmosphere and conditions to direct talks between the parties concerned. Any action must contribute to de-escalate a diplomatic settlement, rather than adding fuel to the fire, leading to further escalation and deterioration of the situation.
In Colombia, local media reported that a group of 50 Colombian ex-military personnel are getting ready to be part of the so-called International Legion of Ukraine. These are mercenary troops summoned by the president of that country, Volodymyr Zelensky. According to statements made by a former Colombian army officer to the newspaper El Espectador, after the announcement made by the Zelensky's government, a group of Colombia ex-military officers contacted an Ukrainian military officer to start the process. The former military, who resides in Bogota, explained that in order to reach the country in Eastern Europe, according to the uniformed officers who are carrying out of this process, they are asked to arrive in Poland by their own means and resources. Once they report their presence at the Ukrainian border, they are contacted by Legion personnel who make them enter the country. Letters recall that President Zelensky called for the entry of foreigners, exempting them from visa requirements, for which there are already about 20,000 listed. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. The effects of the sanctions against Russia are already being felt by the European population, where fuel, gas, energy and commodity prices have risen, and inflation in the Eurozone has risen to 5.8%. More details from Spain with our correspondent Sergio Rodrigo.
Transport company. The rising fuel prices and the closure of the Russian market are already causing him losses after dozens of goods have been stopped in the middle of the crisis. We have planned to export the goods abroad and in Europe. Everything is staying in Holland, and they are moving everything back to this destination because Russia is no longer sending anything. So all the logistics have been planned are returning containers, perishable goods. All these goods are at a standstill. The whole market is at a standstill. The sanctions against Russia have caused the price of electricity to soar to record highs. Maria comes to complain about the increase up to 50% in the bill for her mother, a patient who lives alone.
There are people who don't put the heat on because they can't afford it. There are people who have small children and need to have something on for a longer period of time because of the situation they are living in. And of course, having more expenses makes it impossible to make ends meet.
Punishment to the crueling and international trade blackout are driving inflation up to 5.8%, according to the latest Eurostat report. There has already been an extraordinary rise in the price of gas, and as a consequence of that in the price of energy, and of course in the price of electricity goes up, the prices of all the things that need a lot of electricity to be manufactured go up, for example transport, and of course if the price of transport goes up, the price of all things go up. That is what is being generated in a spiral of inflation. The rising fuel prices are affecting the transport chain, which is already having an impact on the rising price of basic products for European households.
Sergio Rodrigo y Carlos Gil, teleSUR, España.
In Europe, a report by the European Parliament says that 77% of women in the Union believe that the coronavirus pandemic has increased physical and emotional violence against women. The survey revealed that 27,000 women aged 15 and older saw a reduction in their income. The 27 countries that make up the Union are advocating for fastest way to denounce acts of violence in Europe. Meanwhile, legislator Robert Bridgestone, president of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Commission of the European Parliament, says that they will be focusing on the issue of female inequality. On Thursday, extreme poverty in Latin America has reached its worst level in 20 years, including women's employment, due to the coronavirus pandemic, says the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC.
2020 ended with 209 million people living in poverty and 78 million in extreme poverty, that is 33.7% in poverty and 12.5% in extreme poverty. In other words, it slowed down but wasn't contained. COVID-19 has also aggravated the unfair sexual division of labor and the social division of informal caregiving. The truth is that women have been the most affected in this pandemic, and we have a decade-long setback in labor inclusion of women. We reiterate the urgency, and today more clearly than ever, of moving towards a welfare state with universal, comprehensive and sustainable social protection systems, which requires new social pacts.
The government of Peru reached an agreement with Repsol by means of which the company commits to deliver an advance payment for compensation to those affected by the oil spill that occurred on January 15 off the coast of Lima. The agreement establishes that the Spanish multinational will pay a partial part of the economic compensation to mitigate the impact of the spill on the beaches of Lima. For its part, Repsol emphasized that this commitment is in addition to the agreements it had previously signed to benefit more than 1,550 fishermen affected by the environmental disaster. Argentina's justice system resumes the investigation into the debt acquired with the International Monetary Fund during the administration of former President Mauricio Macri. A federal judge ordered a series of measures to find out the main operators in the foreign exchange market at the time when former President Mauricio Macri arranged the loan with the IMF. The magistrate requested the central bank to identify the companies that made the largest clear transfers of foreign currency abroad during the period under investigation, and to the persons who made transfer for $40.5 million for more. The judiciary pointed out that the measure seeks to establish the companies and citizens that benefited from the indebtedness of the state. Amidst the situation of violence in Colombia, the electoral campaign is gearing up prior to the legislative elections on March 13th. In this context, the social organizations that make up the electoral mission of observers stress the fact that there are several women as candidates to the legislature. In these elections, for the first time, there are 4 lists with gender parity in their pre-election report. The observers included a chapter on the violence against women in politics, which warned of a sustained increase in violent acts against women since 2006. The cited data points to 2021 as the year with the highest incidence of violence against women leaders and human rights defenders, and against the signatories of the peace agreement. Likewise, the Institute of Studies for Development and Peace, in its latest report on violence covering the past 5 years, revealed that 23 women leaders were killed in 2021 and 178 since the signing of the peace accords. We continue in Ecuador. A mission from the International Monetary Fund started the 4th review of the expanded services program they have been running in the country since 2020. The Ecuadorian government expects that once the review is concluded, the IMF will be releasing $700 million as part of the agreed total financing of $6.5 billion, of which $4.8 billion have already been given to the country. Analysts and economists denounce that this agreement allows the Ecuadorian executive to reduce social investment and increase in layoff in the public sector. And we have more news coming up after the final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The 5th session of the 13th National People's Congress opened at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing today and is scheduled to conclude on March 11th. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang delivered the report on the government's work since the NPC's last session. Among the main issues for future economic and social growth in China, the Premier spoke about improving social security and social services, medical and health services, and fairness and equality of education. He also referred to taking well-ordered steps to achieve peak carbon neutrality and continue to meet people's housing needs. In addition, he mentioned the growth of the GDP and the Chinese economy for this year.
Income that is basically in step with economic growth. Steady increases in both the volume and quality of imports and exports, a basic equilibrium in the balance of payments, growth of over 650 million metric tons, further improvements in the environment, continued reduction in the discharge of major pollutants, energy consumption per unit of GDP to be assessed with appropriate flexibility within the framework of the 14th five-year plan, and the exclusion of newly added renewable energy and coal, petroleum, and natural gas consumed as raw material in the total amount of energy consumption. The above economic growth target is based mainly on the need to maintain stable employment, meet basic living needs, and guard against risks. It represents a medium-high rate of growth given our large economic aggregate, and that demonstrates our ability to move proactively.
In Malawi, nearly 3 million children will be vaccinated against polio after a case was reported in the country's capital. Health officials reported that a 3-year-old girl tested positive for polio after contracting the disease in the city of Lilongwe. This is the first case of wild poliovirus to be recorded on the African continent in more than 5 years. Authorities have declared a polio outbreak across the country, noting that the emergence of the virus is of great concern. Meanwhile, Rudolf Swenk, head of the UN Children's Agency UNICEF in Malawi, said the southern African country will proceed and distribute 6.9 million doses of polio vaccine for children. all of them under 5 years old. The Director General of the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, traveled to Iran this Saturday and met with Iranian officials as Tehran and world powers continue to negotiate a possible return to the nuclear agreement. Numerous rounds of talks, including United States and Iranian negotiators, have been held in the Austrian capital over the past year to reach a new agreement to replace a 2015 deal exchanging curbs on Iranian nuclear activities for sanctions reliefs. Then U.S. President Donald Trump pulled Washington out of the deal in 2018 and reinstated crippling sanctions against Iran, and Tehran subsequently fell out of compliance with some terms of the agreement. Media outlets stated that if Grossi's trip could help the agency and Tehran to reach a roadmap to resolve existing safeguard issues, it can also help revival of the nuclear deal in Vienna. United States President Joe Biden extends national emergency on Iran for another year. Amid the 8th round of talks in Vienna to strike a nuclear deal with Iran, Biden justified the measure, saying Iranian government actions and policies continue to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of the United States, its foreign policy and its economy. Meanwhile, the Iranian government said that if the Vienna talks were to conclude with no agreements, the United States and its three main European allies would be to be blamed. Japan's Supreme Court confirmed that Tokyo Electric Power Enterprise must pay more than $12 million to some 307 people affected by the Fukushima nuclear disaster. According to local media, the court found the company negligent in taking preventive measures for failing to act in the face of a tsunami threat following a 9.0 magnitude earthquake off Japan's northeastern coast in March 2011. The court's decision provides for an average payout of about $3,300 for each victim of the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster. Some 470,000 people were forced to evacuate in the first few days, and tens of thousands have still not been able to return. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find this and many other stories at our website at telesurenglish.net, and you can also join us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.